everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Insider Tips on Microsoft SQL Server 16. My name is Michelle and I'll be helping with today's session. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate. This webinar is being recorded, so we will provide you a link to the recording as soon as it is available. You have joined today's webinar listening through your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to use your telephone, just locate your audio pane and select Use Telephone. The dial-in information and access code will then be displayed. Attendees will be in listen-only mode, but we invite you to ask questions about the presentation using the questions panel. Just type in your question there and click Send. At the end of the webinar, we'll do a Q&A session and take as many of those questions as we have time for. So let's continue this conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag SQL Server Ready. Now I'd like to introduce you to our presenter today. Brian Egler is a Global Knowledge Instructor and Course Director specializing in Microsoft SQL Server. He has been a technical instructor for over 25 years and has more than 15 years of experience with SQL Server, data modeling, database design, and application development, including IMS, DB2, and Sybase. Every year he runs the Boston Marathon for cancer research. So thanks so much, Brian, for being here with us today. Welcome, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Welcome, everyone, and we're going to talk a little bit about the next release of SQL Server. So it's 2016 next year, and this is on the list of new releases. And we're going to look at some special features that, well, I think are pretty special as part of the release. And we've been given CTP2, which is Community Technology Preview. Number 2, that's now available, and so we can start looking at these new features and test them out and see what we think. And of course, it's an evolving thing, but so further CTPs are expected, but over time we'll be fleshing out the whole product. And yeah, I hope to show you some interesting stuff that's coming down the pike. So before we start, I wanted to do a quick poll of what release level you are currently at in production. And I typically do this at the beginning of a class and that I'm teaching, and just to get an idea of what release level you're working at in terms of production. So you can check off whatever you like, more than one if you see fit, but it's just kind of interesting to see where folks are at in terms of the release level of SQL Server. So go ahead and check that off. And I must say, based on classes that I teach, usually it's SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2, which we'll include as one here for this poll. And it might be interesting to see what the results are. And yeah, well, and it looks like a lot of people are pushing forward with 2012, which is great to see. So that's good news. Of course, every 2 years now, it looks like Microsoft are going to be releasing a new version of SQL Server. But bear in mind that they do try and do incremental releases, so you can just build on the established foundation that you have already. And when you need the new features, that's the motivation to then upgrade. So anyway, let's take a look at, so that's good. A lot of you are onto 2012 and looking, some of you onto 2014 already, so you're ready to go. Now, as always, Microsoft have a set of themes for the release, and first of all, number 1 on the list is mission critical performance. Of course, we want our databases to run as fast as possible with high query transaction throughput, and we need our databases to run faster than ever with high availability, scalability, etc. So that's a major theme that's consistent across most releases. The second theme is deeper insights across data, which is another way of saying the business intelligence stack is being improved. So we want better business intelligence analytics, and also the hyperscale cloud. Microsoft has made some great progress in terms of the cloud databases, the cloud services, as they transition to become a services-based company. And their cloud business is really probably the most successful part of the business at this time, and they want to have SQL Server play a part in that, and the hyperscale cloud is going to let us port more and more data into the cloud as necessary, as appropriate. So there's still a lot of security questions there, but hopefully we'll have some answers to those right now and maybe in the future. So now, those three themes I took a look at, and I took a look at the CTP2 and experimented with it a bit, and I came up with three of my favorite features that I wanted to explore deeper. Hopefully you'll feel the same way. Number one that I selected was Always Encrypted, and this is a new feature that allows you to encrypt your data columns from end to end, from client to server, so that the data is always encrypted, even in the cloud or on premises. It doesn't matter where, the data is always encrypted until your client wants to decrypt and is authorized, obviously, to do so. So we're going to take a look at that new feature. The temporal data, this is an interesting new feature. It's actually an ANSI ISO standard, and it allows you to automatically capture historical changes with a normal table, and we'll see how that's done using temporal data. And then the third feature I want to show you is the stretch database, and this is the ability to offload your historical tables and your historical data up to the cloud for occasionally accessed use. And so you keep your most active tables on premises, local, high performing, but maybe you want to offload these large historical tables to the cloud, so you have a hybrid approach. And so you actually have a database that's stretched to the cloud. It's kind of an interesting feature as well, kind of a first step in that hybrid database paradigm. So we'll take a look at that one too, and hopefully you find some of this somewhat interesting. Yeah, so let's start off with Always Encrypted. Now, I've got to give a little bit of a history lesson here, because Microsoft introduced column level encryption in 2005, in the 2005 release. And that was all well and good. It was column level encryption. It was the first time native data encryption was introduced into the product. Before that, we had to do third-party products to do encryption. And but the problem with the column level encryption in 2005 was you had to actually go in and change the application. You had to use, for instance, you had to use functions like encrypt by key and decrypt by key, and so you had to have to go in and change the application to do that. But that's still available if you want to use column level encryption from that point of view. Then in 2008. Microsoft introduced transparent data encryption, or what we call TDE, and that was a quick way of encrypting the whole database in one fell swoop, and it provided encryption for data at rest. So when the database was on disk, when it was on backup tape or backup device, your data would be encrypted. But as soon as the data was in motion over the network or in memory, it was unencrypted. So there was a drawback there. So this new Always Encrypted feature is something that is really the best of both worlds. It's transparent and it's column level, so you have column level encryption, you have end-to-end security from client to server, and it's transparent. You don't have to change the application because everything's done at the client driver, at the client level, and it's when you have the client connection software that and the driver at the client level, that's where the encryption and decryption is done. So there's no application changes needed. Everything's done on the client side. And what's interesting with this feature is we can now separate data owners from the data managers. Which so a data manager is like most of ourselves, I presume, DBAs, sysadmins, that type of folks, and of course we need to keep the database up and running and so on. But in a lot of cases, we shouldn't be able to see this private, sensitive data. But in the past, if you're sysadmin, you can see everything, right? So, but now what the requirement is the business analysts and the data owners, the people that own the data, need to see the sensitive data, but the DBAs don't. And in fact, in industries like healthcare and so on, it's very important that this type of separation is implemented. And the way it's done is we have to create, first of all, a column master key, and then we create a column encryption key. And it's actually the column encryption key that does the data encryption, and it's the column master key that then encrypts the encryption key. So it's kind of feeding on itself. But this is a common encryption strategy using both asynchronous or asymmetric rather, and symmetric encryption. And the real difference here is that decryption and encryption occurs on the client machine, and the way that's done is a certificate is installed on the local client machine so that the certificate can access the master key can access the encryption key, and the encryption key can perform the decryption, all on the client machine. So what that means is that any link in the chain that's missing, the decryption and encryption won't occur. So like all encryption strategies, all the links in the chain have to be present for it to work. But what's interesting is that the data is always encrypted on the server. So SQL Server itself, on the server, the data is always encrypted on the selected columns that you choose. And the decryption occurs on the client machine only. So in Management Studio, what you would go ahead and do is create a column master key, a column encryption key, and then identify which columns you want to have encrypted. And that, again, they'll always be encrypted on the server. It's just when an authorized client can access the data, they have to have that certificate, they have to have access to the columns, of course, and decryption will occur. And this is an example create table statement that I used for testing. I captured this screenshot from SQL Server 2016 CTP2, and I just tested this out. And what I did was I created a simple table called customers, and we have two encrypted columns here, customer name and phone, and we have a postal code column that's not encrypted. So, and what's the interesting thing about this particular slide is that you have a choice of encryption type. You have deterministic and randomized, and the difference here is deterministic will always take the same input and encrypt it and produce the same output given the same input. So it encrypts in a predictable way. But of course, with the encryption keys, you're not going to be able to decrypt unless you have that certificate and the associated keys. Now, if you have just a small number of distinct values in that column, it may be so predictable that someone could deduce what the values are. For instance, if you had a region code and it was north, west, east, and south, there's just 4 values there. It's going to be fairly predictable, so you may run into trouble there. If you have that situation, you may choose randomized. Randomized means it's not predictable. It's going to randomly encrypt, so the same input may encrypt differently, and it has a more sophisticated algorithm there. However, if you go with randomized, you cannot use that column in a where clause for equality checks. You can't build indexes on that column. You can't do joins on that column. So as long as you have enough distinct values, you're probably going to go with deterministic, and then you'll be safe. And then you can use that column in where clauses for equality checks. You can do indexes and joins and so on the column. So anyway, that's the difference there. If you need to know that, as if you test this out. Now, I'm a sysadmin, so what I did was set up a table and populate it with data using the import-export wizard and using the certificate and the appropriate encryption keys. But even as sysadmin, when I run a query against the table, you can see that even though I have access to the keys and so on, what I don't have access to is the certificate on the client machine, so it shows me the columns encrypted. So that's appropriate for sensitive data. Just because I'm a DBA or sysadmin doesn't mean I should be able to see everything, but I can at least administer the database. However, what if there's obviously a client, an authorized user who does need to see that information? Then the difference there is that on the client machine, the certificate, the associated certificate is installed and available in the Windows Certificate Store. And in order to access it, the connection string has to use this special option. It's column encryption setting equals enabled. And that connection string setting means go looking for an appropriate certificate, and of course the user has to have access and permissions to use that certificate and the keys, and access to the columns itself. So again, all the links in the chain have to be there, but you can see from the slide that I took that you can see that the data is decrypted. Whoops. Okay, so there, that's always encrypted. Now I'm going to switch to demo mode because I wanted to show you a couple things there. Let's see, I'm going to go to, I'm using Windows 10 here. So we do have our start button back, and I'm going to go to the task view, and we're going to switch to Azure. I've set up a virtual machine in Azure for testing, and using 2016 CTP 2.2. And this is, if you haven't used Windows 10, it's kind of nice that you can set up multiple desktops, and you got your start button back, and you go to tablet mode if you need to and such. But anyway, I'm going to switch to Azure here, and I'm now running SQL Server in the cloud on a virtual machine hosted by Microsoft. So this is live now, and I can run a query, just a normal query against the table, and you can see that I'm sysadmin, but the data is still encrypted for me. And in order for an authorized user to see the data, they need to use that setting, column encryption setting equals enabled. And of course, I have pre-installed the certificate on the client machine. So I'm going to paste that option into my connection settings and click connect. And now that I have access to that certificate and the associated keys, I can now run the query, and now it decrypts. But the decryption is actually happening on the client layer, not on the server. So on the server, it's always encrypted. And that's very important if you start thinking about cloud-based databases. There's a lot of security questions, and one of them is, I don't want people to see my data. So if it's always encrypted in the cloud, then that's going to at least be a secure solution. But this is equally available on on-premises databases as well, locally, for extra security. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you there. So we'll switch back to the slides. The next feature I wanted to show you is temporal data. And this is an ISO ANSI standard as part of the SQL 2011 specification. So it's there's some specifications that Microsoft is adhering to. But this is a neat feature in that it allows you to automatically capture historical changes and reference them easily through historical tables that are actually hidden under the hood. So There's another name for this. It's called system versioned tables, and it allows you not only to see the current data, but it allows you to see historical data in terms of changes that have happened before, and it automatically is taken care of by the database engine. So this has all sorts of potential. For instance, you could use it for auditing to find out who's doing what, when, and how. You could use it for quick undo operations. You accidentally do an update and you want to get the old data back. It's in the history table. So actually, a temporal table consists of two tables under the hood. One is the current table, which has the current values, which is normally what you want to query. But secondly, you have an additional history table that stores all the changes, and it also has the start date and time and the end date and time when those values were valid. So you can keep track of exactly when the valid values were in place. And this also helps in terms of populating a data warehouse. In a data warehouse, we have the concept of a slowly changing dimension, or an SCD. And an example might be, say, a customer moving from Seattle to New York. We have the fundamental question in business intelligence: do we keep track of the person's orders when they were in Seattle, or do we just move them to New York and just hope for the best that the New York region appreciates the new orders? Of course, we want to be accurate, so we want the Seattle orders to stay in Seattle and the New York orders to go to the New York region, of course. So that is very important for accurate analysis. And in order to do that, we have to set up what we call a slowly changing dimension. It's a SCD type 2, technically, and it means I do want to keep track of historical data. And it's fairly easy to set up. We normally set up a surrogate key and a start date and time and an end date and time, but we have to do it manually. And the trickiness is in the population. To actually populate that table, you have some tricky code going on. But with this temporal data feature, if you have this in the operational system, you just copy the data over, and it's simple. And also you have the benefits of the auditing and the undo operations as well thrown in. So it's kind of a neat feature that you might want to take a look at. And this is how you create a temporal table. The key feature, the key clause here is with system versioning equals on. So that tells the system that you want this to be a temporal data table. And what it'll do is it'll create two tables. One's the current table, one's the history table. And the current table always has the current data. And we also have two extra columns, the start date and time and the end date and time, to keep track of when values were valid. Now, the neat thing about this also is you can take an existing table and turn it into a temporal data table. And you don't have to change the queries that you already have in your application. You can run the same queries against the table because the default is to get the current data from the current data table. So nothing will change from that regard. But you also have this history table that you can look at other previous updates and when they happened and when they were valid. And so you have some additional functionality there just by making a table into a temporal table. Now, for instance, you could actually run a query directly against the history table. Here's the history table for that temporal data table. And we can see that this history table has 3 entries. That means this there's been 3 updates since the initial inserts to the table. And I've updated the department 3 times, and it shows me the old data and when it was valid, when it was overwritten or updated, and so we can keep track. This is effectively an audit trail of what happened in the history table, in the temporal data table. So that's kind of interesting. The Object Explorer in Management Studio actually shows us both tables. If we do implement temporal data on a particular table, it'll say system versioned on the table, and that is the name of the the current table. So your existing queries on that table do not have to change. So those queries will run with the current data. But what you get for free is this history table, and it's sitting in the background and capturing those updates. So so you can keep track of what changes. And again, with a data warehouse, you can just copy in those changes to an SCD type 2 dimension table, and you're good to go. Now, I also want to show you something in the demo form here that actually is additional functionality that you might be interested in. And so I'm going to switch back to Azure. And this is, again, a full version of SQL Server running in the cloud on an Azure virtual machine. And I'm going to go to Temporal data query here. Now, I've set up the same table that we saw in the slides. So it's dbo.department. There it is, and it's system versioned there. And we can see the history table there too. But just to show you that you can just run normal queries on the existing table, this is the current data. So I'm just running a query. This is just an ordinary query to look at the data in the table, and it just shows us the current values. Now what's different is you have the start date and time and end date and time just to show you. Now for current data, the end time is always going to be the maximum value in a date time 2 data type. So it just shows that that's current. That's these values are current. And you can also query, as we showed in the slide, you can query the history table as well. So I'm just going to do a select top 1,000 rows from the history table, and that'll show us that I've made 3 updates to this table, and it shows us when I did those changes. And so that's the history table. But you can actually have SQL Server query both tables at the same time using the for system time clause. This is new in 2016. And if you use a temporal table and you say for system time as of in a particular time, that will allow you to travel in time. So you'll actually be able to go back in time to see the data as it was at a particular date and time. So, for instance, here, I created this table this morning, and I didn't populate it initially with any data. So at 10:45 this morning, it was empty, and that's showing it. Then I actually inserted 3 rows just after that. So at 10:46, we should see this was the initial 3 inserts. So 10:46, it's showing us what the data looked like at that time. And then if I go to 10:47, I made some updates, and it shows us the data as it was at 10:47. So in this way, you can move the window and you can travel in time. It's called time travel. I know my daughters are big into Doctor Who, and they always talk about wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey time travel, which I don't know anything about. But anyway, this maybe I can get my daughters into SQL Server this way, but maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, this is they're talking about time travel, being able to move that window, and you can also do a between clause to show data that was valid in a range of dates and times as well. So you can do things like that. So that's added functionality to this temporal data feature. So it's kind of neat. So I'm going to go back to the slides here. So that's temporal data. And the final feature I'm going to explore here is the stretch database. And this is a first step in the direction of hybrid databases. In other words, databases that have an on-premises set of data and also have a cloud-based set of data. And we choose appropriately which data resides where. And the idea here is, say we have a large database, and we have a lot of historical tables that are occasionally needed, but not needed on a highly active basis. But we have tables also in our database that are very active, and we want to keep those local. But the historical tables, because they're not that active and they're only occasionally needed, wouldn't it be nice if we could kind of offload those to the cloud and still keeping them there, but then we reduce our storage costs locally, and that'll make our local queries faster because we're dealing with less data. There's more memory available. So that's what a stretch database is. It's actually a database that has a local set of data and a remote set of data hosted in SQL database in Azure, so the Azure SQL database. Now, in CTP2, you identify tables that you want to stretch to the cloud, and at the moment, the whole table stretches to the cloud. So if you have a historical table, it's easy just to stretch it to the cloud, and it'll migrate through what they call trickle migration. It'll migrate with low impact and low network requirements. It'll trickle over time to the remote data store in the cloud. But over time, eventually the whole table will go to the remote database in the cloud. Microsoft tell us that in future CTPs they're going to have a filtering capability where you can decide which rows go to the cloud and which rows stay local, so even within the same table. But at the moment, it's the whole table will be migrated to the cloud based on it being historical table. But the query optimizer is intelligent enough to know what data is local, what data is remote, and even if migration is in place and only part of the data has been migrated, it'll still access the local data and the remote data at the same time through the execution plan. So we're going to take a look at that. It's kind of an interesting feature, but from a schematic point of view, we have here the stretch database. On the left-hand side, we have the local database on-premises instance of SQL Server 2016. We have local data. Our most active tables are still going to be local. But when we mark a database, well, first of all, we have to enable stretch databases at the instance level. Then we have to enable stretch for the database as well. And then we enable individual tables that we want to stretch to the cloud. And then the data in those tables becomes what we call eligible. So it's eligible for migration. And SQL Server sets up automatically a linked server and sets up an Azure SQL database in the cloud. And again, it does this trickle migration, which is meant to have a low impact, but over time, these large tables are going to be migrated, and one row at a time. And you can pause migration and resume migration if you want to have this happen at off-peak times. And, but over time, the data will go to the remote database and be resident there. And this is how we enable it. We have to enable it at the instance level, then we go to the database and we enable the database for stretch, and that also sets up your Azure SQL database in the cloud so that it's ready to copy over tables and migrate tables to that cloud store. And then we have to enable each table that we want to stretch to the cloud. And again, these are historical tables. That tells SQL Server that we want to migrate the data, and all the data becomes eligible and eventually is migrated over. Now, when we run queries against the table, again, the queries don't have to change. The queries are exactly the same as they were before, but the execution plan is going to be different. What you're going to see is the remote query piece of the query plan. So it's actually still accessing the local table, and then it also accesses the remote table in the cloud. And the reason for that is, remember that this is a trickle migration strategy, so there may be still some rows left in the local data table, but over time it's all going to go to the remote table. But at any point in time, the query will result in the correct return of rows. And here I've waited for the migration to happen completely, so you can see that the remote query is doing 100% of the work, and there's actually no data in the local table. So migration has completed here. And but I also ran the same query during the migration. It produced the same results. It's just some of the results came from the local table, and the rest of the results came from the remote table. And there's all sorts of fail-safe mechanisms built in to make sure that you don't lose any rows in migration, and so it's there's fail-safe operations built in to make sure that you always have your data, whether it's local or remote or a combination of both. Okay, now again, I want to go off to the demo just to show you a couple things there. So I'm going to switch back to Azure. And this is the command that you would run to enable stretch capability on the instance of SQL Server. So you have to run spconfigure and request remote data archive. Okay, that's not turned on by default. So you have to request that first at the instance level. Then what you have to do is go to your database and enable stretch at the database level, and then you have to identify the table that you want to stretch, or the tables that you want to stretch. And I chose the sales order detail table, and so I've already set that up just like I showed you in the slides. Okay, so again, the queries don't have to change. So you run the same queries as you've always done against that table, and it returns the same results. Here, in this case, I'm not sure if you can see, but it's 121,000 rows in this sales order detail. But the key difference is in the execution plan. The execution plan shows us that it's actually accessing the local table, which at this point is empty because the migration has occurred completely, and it's then doing a remote query to the cloud database to get the data from there. Now, obviously, a remote query is going to run slower than a local query, but this is for historical data that's occasionally accessed, and what it will do is it'll allow less storage requirements on the local server, and it'll allow your local active queries to run faster because there's going to be less resources being used by your database now that you've offloaded these historical tables to the cloud. So that's the theory anyway. You obviously got to test it out, make sure it actually is true for your data. But that's the concept of the stretch database. And if I switch to Azure, let's see. Oh no, that's if I switch to my Azure, oh well, I'm not sure you can see that, but it's reloading my portal from Azure, and what we should see is a Azure SQL database that's been set up on my behalf by the wizard that created the stretch database, and that will show us exactly what the wizard did. So yeah, so here we can see it set up a Azure SQL database on my behalf, and that is now the host for the stretch table that I identified. So that's now residing in the cloud and accessible by my application. But again, no queries had to change to get that working. So that's the concept there as well. And of course, you can, as always in Azure, you can monitor things and see how the performance of the Azure database. But again, being a remote query, it's not going to perform as fast as the local queries, but that's by design. It's the local queries now that will speed up for your most active tables, but the historical tables will be available, but they'll be offloaded to the cloud. So that's the idea there. Okay, so those are the three features that I wanted you to see. Again, just to summarize, we looked at Always Encrypted, which is a new end-to-end solution so that your data is always encrypted and only is decrypted at the client level. So even if your data is in the cloud or on premises, it's always encrypted on the server, and only authorized clients can decrypt and encrypt accordingly. Temporal data is for quickly and easily setting up the automatic capture of historical changes, and really allows you some functionality, including the population of slowly changing dimensions in a data warehouse, as well as auditing and undo features. So that's kind of nice. And the stretch database that allows you to build a database that's effectively a hybrid database where your most active data is stored locally on the server, and your historical data might be offloaded to the cloud through Azure. So those are the three features. Just so you know, the training that we offer as Global Knowledge are probably our most popular classes are what we call boot camps, and these are focused on certification. They're intense immersion training type courses, but they can offer some great benefits in terms of compressed training, intense training if you like that, but also exam prep and online mentoring and access to labs for 12 months, so you have access to all these resources for 12 months. But the MCSA bootcamp, for instance, is a 9-day bootcamp. That's the Microsoft Certified Solutions Associate, and that bootcamp gets you the foundation certification. And the bootcamps are organized so that you can take the exams as soon as you want, or a year from the bootcamp. You have 12 months really to sort things out. And in fact, some people attend these bootcamps just to get some intense training. For instance, the MCSA bootcamp is 3 weeks of training in 9 days. So you save some time there if you're willing to work the long hours. But some people prefer that, and then the certification exams are just a bonus. And you don't even have to use those, but you get free exam vouchers as part of the boot camp. You even get retake vouchers. If you don't pass first time, you get a free retake voucher, so you can't really lose. And you get access to training kits and online reference books as well. And the 12-month access is very attractive to folks who want to keep practicing, and eventually get their certification. But you can plan it out anytime in that 12-month period. And then the MCSE boot camps are the next level up. So these are 2 exams instead of the 3 exams of the MCSA. And so there are only 5 days, but it's 2 weeks of training done in 5 days with all the exam prep and the access to labs for 12 months and so on. And you have 2 flavors of the MCSE, which is the Solutions Expert certification, and you can choose Data Platform, which is the classic DBA type skills, or Business Intelligence, which is analysis services, reporting services, and integration services combined, and also focus on that business intelligence stack. So your choice. Those are very popular, so we always like to highlight those. And when new releases come out, if Microsoft updates the certifications, we update the bootcamp. So when you come to the bootcamp, we're always using the latest and greatest that's available from Microsoft. Also, if you do want to attend a course that just covers the new features of SQL Server 2016. There will be a course for that. When Microsoft releases that, we'll have it available, and that will be a 5-day class that you can focus on the features that I showed you, plus many more besides. So that'll be available when released by Microsoft. So keep an eye on the globalknowledge.com website, and we'll be able to show you that. And that course, of course, like all courses that we offer, there's a virtual component for a virtual class done over the internet, or you can come to one of our training centers across the world and attend in person if you wish. Another option is if you have around 10 people who need the same training, it's actually cost effective to bring us on the premises and come to your site, and that way it's actually more cost effective, and also that means you can tailor or customize the class to your own needs, so you get kind of double benefit there if you have enough people you want trained. And yeah, so this is a webinar. Obviously you can access this recording on your Knowledge Center. Michelle will let us know how that's done and in a moment. And we do have an associated white paper that goes into a lot more detail than I've just shown you here in the brief time we've had together. But and there's other resources there. Just go to globalknowledge.com and look for the Knowledge Center, and all that stuff is there for you. Okay. So I'm going to hand back to Michelle here, because we want to see if there's any questions that come up that we might be able to answer. So Michelle, do you want to let me know if there's any questions?
Yeah, just a reminder to everyone, we will send a link to this recording as soon as it is available. If you do have a question, just locate your questions panel and just type in your question there, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. I do have a few coming in here. The first one, when you back up the stretched data, does it back up everything?
Does it back up everything in a stretched database? The good news about a stretched database is that your normal backups don't have to change. But what you should know is that your normal backups will just back up the local data. So the Azure SQL Database platform has its own built-in backups and that are done regularly, and so that'll be separate, but it will be done. So, but it's important to know that your normal backups don't have to change, but they will only back up the local data. So yeah, that's a good question.
All right.
Any others?
Yes. Yes. Can you change an existing table to a temporal table?
Yes. Actually, you can. You can take an existing table and turn it into a temporal table. That is allowed. And once again, the cool thing is there you don't have to change your queries. So you can run your application with its own queries, and you don't have to change a thing. And then you get the bonus of that history table in the background. You have to know that the table will have two new columns, the start date and time and the end date and time, but assuming you don't mind that, you can change an existing table to a temporal table, and also you don't have to change the existing queries. So that's good news too. Good, yeah, that's a good one.
Is there also an update for certification?
The certification, we have to wait on Microsoft to tell us. I haven't heard anything, but they do come out with certification updates when the release is official. So sometime next year we'll be hearing what's going on. But I know the long-term strategy is that the certification exams will include the latest release as well as existing functionality, and the idea is, for instance, for the MCSE certifications, you're just certified in SQL Server. There's no mention of release level at that point because you just were certified in SQL Server at that time when it was current. And then they request that you certify every 3 years after that. So you just got to take the latest exams. And it's a new strategy. The MCSA certification is still locked in at 2012, and Microsoft Learning tell us that they have no plans to change that at the moment. So our MCSA bootcamp is 2012, but our MCSE bootcamps cover 2014 features because the exams cover 2014 features. So when 2016 comes out, presumably the exams will be updated. So when they are available, we'll update our boot camps, and but we got to wait for Microsoft to tell us when to go. And being a gold learning partner, we'll do that when they have the strategy lined up. So we'll upgrade when necessary. Yeah. So, but that new idea of having to recertify every 3 years is something we're just coming up to, and actually that's something I'm in the process of doing because it's 2015 and my 2012 certifications, have to be recertified. So I have to go and do that myself by October, actually. So I got to get on the ball. But yeah, so yeah, another good question. That was a long answer to a short question.
Would a temporal table have its own LDF?
The question relates to the transaction log. The transaction log is associated with the database itself, so the temporal table doesn't have its own log file. But all the updates are recorded in the transaction log as well as in the temporal table, in the history table. So the answer is no, it doesn't have its own LDF. It's all integrated in the single log file, the transaction log for the database. But yeah, that's a good one.
One more I think we have time for. Can you use Always Encrypted with Azure?
In terms of Always Encrypted, actually, yes. If you, I tested this out. If you have a virtual machine in Azure hosting a SQL Server database, you can use Always Encrypted. I tried the same thing against an Azure SQL database, and it wouldn't let me at this time. But that doesn't mean to say that in future CTPs they'll not allow that. But you can definitely do it using the Azure virtual machine. So, and Always Encrypted is going to be a very important feature going forward because, yeah, people have questions about security in the cloud, and that's one solution that will make people feel comfortable about storing data in the cloud. If it's encrypted and it's always encrypted, then okay, we can use the cloud. Otherwise, we wouldn't dream of it, right? So yes, you can using a Azure virtual machine, and you can do that today with CTP2, and I'm sure there'll be more with the future CTPs as well.
All right, thank you so much, Brian. Everyone be on the lookout for that email. Should go out within the next couple of days. Brian, thanks for being with us today, and hope everyone has a great day. I'll let you close them out.
All right. Well, thanks, Michelle. And yeah, we'll see you in the classroom or on the virtual network from our next class at Global Knowledge.